So none of us really had ever heard of Tourette's before. My dad actually used to pay me, like we would go hiking a lot and he would pay me not to do my tics.
Hey everybody, it's Ben with kind of a different episode this week. We still have our usual conversation and it's excellent, but we also have another guest with a different angle on TS. We'll get to that shortly. Got some great feedback on the episode last week with Reggie. A lot of people connected with him and his, I guess, realistic positivity about his Tourette's and his advice on, not just going through the workday and through life himself, but also being the father to a kid with TS and having that angle on understanding it and conveying that experience to his son and his teachers and so on. Just that episode really covered a lot for a lot of different kinds of people, so I really suggest you go back and listen to that if you haven't already. Also, that listener question that we got last week from Justin about the merits of just bypassing or avoiding the TS label altogether in order to avoid false limitations and societal difficulties or definitions that set the course of our lives. And Justin was asking, is it better to just get away from the need to label TS as such or even diagnose it so we can take on challenges on our own terms? That was the question from Justin, which I gave my answer to in the last episode, Season 2, Episode 13. A lot of you weighed in as well, and the answers were pretty consistent in terms of the bottom line. And so Jamie, a user in the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook, said, quote, "My mother avoided the label with me. I wasn't formally diagnosed until I did so on my own at age 21. I respect her choice. She didn't want me to ever get held back. But for me, the label gave me answers, finally. So I had a way to educate the rude people who would point or stare or say hurtful things. There was such power in that. So the label, for me, was empowering. I definitely don't regret getting the formal diagnosis." End quote. And then you remember Jaleesa, who appeared on episode 1 of this season. I asked her to weigh in because she's pretty consistent with uncommon wisdom, and she said this, quote, "I think I would just ask the person who asked it, is there really something about the TS label that's holding you back in some way, or is it the stigma around the label? Because we don't think the same way about labels like woman or musician or redhead. This only seems to be a problem with parts of identity people see as negative or shameful. I personally don't like to look at my Tourette's through the lens of shame or avoidance. Or perhaps there's another reason someone might have for not wanting a label, and that works for them. It's a very personal choice. I would say, however, that I really hate when diagnoses are denied to children. I spent most of my life without diagnoses, and it sucked. I was completely unable to explain myself or advocate for myself. I thought there was something seriously wrong with me as a human being, and it wasn't as if I didn't get labeled. Instead of my real diagnoses, my peers and even teachers labeled me retarded, lazy, dramatic, stupid, slow, weird, crazy, etc., etc. My actual diagnoses, in contrast, are empowering. Now I can explain myself without referring to some flaw in my character. I wish I had that option as a kid. I don't know that it would have made my classmates treat me better, but I would have known I wasn't wrong in some way." End quote. So that's from Jaleesa, who put up her responses on Twitter. Her handle is @TwitchySpoonie. And then Christine Conalia, who's a scientist working in the field of tic disorders, including TS, replied with this, quote, "Beautifully stated, and an equally important message to healthcare providers, who do sometimes also harbor these fears of labeling, and refrain from giving a TS diagnosis when it's warranted." End quote. Then Michelle Myron, and I'm so sorry if I just pronounced your last name incorrectly, Michelle replied to Jaleesa as well. She said, "I'm glad you said this. It makes my heart sink when parents say they don't want their kids labeled. My kids have diagnoses, and I feel like they don't want their kids to be abnormal like mine. My kids are amazing and talented, and yes, they do face challenges." End quote. So Jaleesa capped it off with this, quote, "I think that's exactly it, a failure to recognize difference. I think lacking labels before made me more proud and outspoken about them now. I think it's good to be abnormal and weird, and if nothing else, embrace the parts of you people told you to be ashamed of." End quote. So that was just a really great dialogue, and again, if you want my thoughts on it, check out the episode previous to this one. Also got some responses to that question about getting tattooed while painfully resisting the urge to tic. Check out the Tourette's Pod Twitter feed, and I think that's also got some discussion in the Facebook group as well. I could be wrong, but head there anyway, because it's a really great TS hangout. And then one more super quick take. It's something I saw today in one of the TS groups on Facebook. I guess this was just an example of words coming together the right way and just kind of knocking it out of the park in terms of a wise but simple way or simple take on a way to go about living with TS. And so someone posted a question in one of these groups asking about our jobs. What do we Touretters do for a living? And is this job something that might be viewed as something that people with TS might not be able to do? And that might not be able to do is in quotes there. And so a Touretter named Stephen Koenig replied with this, quote, "I'm a teacher. I don't manage my tics so much as manage my situation by being open about the TS from the go-get and having a sense of humor about it." End quote. And what I like about that is, you can live however you want with TS, of course, until the point where TS makes our decisions for us. But generally, given the choices we can make them, open or closeted. But I've often, I think, packed an error or a presumption into some of the questions I ask on this show. Often in the question of, how do you manage your tics? Is it medication or some kind of exercise? Or, I ask that kind of thing a lot. But I like how Stephen approached it here by de-emphasizing tic management and highlighting situation management, or some might say owning it. And what I get from that, and forgive me, Stephen, if I'm putting words in your mouth and this isn't what you meant, but what I get from that, or what continues in my mind, is the notion that we don't need to treat our tics for the benefit of other people. We just need to keep fairness to ourselves in mind, be who we are, and realize there's absolutely nothing wrong outside of situations that we've evaluated as needing to be addressed for ourselves. For example, there are painful tics that a lot of people experience, and of course anxiety can overpower us and so on. So obviously this is not a knock to medication or tic management or anything like that. Don't get the idea that I'm saying that. The context here is what other people think and how they regard us, and creating power in situations like that where possible or if desired. And I just like what Stephen said about managing the situation. Not managing the tics, but managing the situation, which takes confidence to do, but surely also builds it. And that's definitely something I'm still working on for myself. Anywho, thanks to Stephen Koenig for that. His quote again was, "I don't manage tics so much as manage my situation by being open about the TS." End quote. And if any of you have any slamming mantras about TS like that, please share them with me, because I would love to relay them on the show. Even if you think they might be cliche by now, just cliche Tourette Syndrome sayings, that doesn't matter. Send them to me anyway, because there are new people all the time learning that they have Tourette's or that a loved one has Tourette's, and this is a new world that they want to learn about. Or if you're like me and you were closeted your whole life about Tourette's until fairly recently, you might be looking for a good Tourette Syndrome quote book as well. And does that exist yet? A sort of quotation book that you can refer to specifically about TS and dealing with certain situations, like divided up by category, relationships, workplace. That might be something we have to do here as a longer term project, a TS quote book. And massive apologies if that's something that already exists and I'm totally ignorant to it, but a TS quote book is something I kind of want to think about. Anyway, so this episode, slightly different than others we've done before, because in addition to our usual Touretter conversation, we've got our first non-Touretter as well. I think this is this our first non-Touretter guest? Correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got Janet McLaughlin, who's an author of a young adult fiction novel whose protagonist has Tourette Syndrome. So McLaughlin doesn't have TS herself, but knows it because it lives in her family. And that helped to inform the development of the central character of the book. The book is called Different. This is not a paid spot. This is not a promo or anything like that. It's just her people contacted me and I was curious and interested. And after talking to her, it was really nice hearing how she accurately gets the concepts, which, yes, vary between all of us. But in general, I thought she had a really great grasp on TS. I have not read the book yet, personally, which is reflected in the questions I ask her, but I do plan to read the book after talking with her. So that's ahead. First, though, let's talk to AJ. She's a photographer with TS, and she released this photo series a while back. It came out after we talked here. This conversation that you're about to hear actually took place months ago, but she had this photo series, and it was really great. It was called Invisible Illness, and it just kind of captures or portrays things like anxiety and anorexia, and, of course, Tourette Syndrome. So I've been talking a lot. I need to shut up and get to it. Here's me and AJ.
My name is AJ or Anna Jean Millett. I'm from Arizona, and I I'm really into photography, and I'm a college student. I work at a daycare, so part-time job plus full-time student plus photography. So that keeps me pretty busy for sure.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm really into photography too. Is this?
Oh, that's awesome.
I've run into a lot of our listeners who are into photography. Is that something you want to do professionally, or?
Yes, I'm trying to get there. I've only been doing photography for about a year, but I hope to get there someday for sure.
Is there any sort of any kind of subject or style that you're into? I mean, for me, I like street photography a lot. I'm not as good at portrait shooting and things like that, but the candid stuff I love doing. What are you into?
I'm into portrait photography. I started out with nature a couple years back, and then I fell in love with portraits about a year ago, and
Awesome.
hope to get into wedding photography someday.
So a year into photography, how'd you discover that?
It was one of my friends from high school, actually, that I used to model for her when she was first getting started, and then started playing around with some cameras and just realized that it's something I'm really into. It's a good creative outlet for me.
Okay, so are you studying something different from photography in college, or?
Yeah, I'm studying theology, actually, which is religion. I know a lot of people don't know that. I want to get into youth ministry, so help teens find. I'm a Catholic, so it'll be specifically that, but help teens just find God, sort of thing.
And so with Tourette syndrome, we've interacted a lot on Twitter, but are you open about that? Do you communicate with your friends about it? People you go to school with, employers, that sort of thing?
I'm very open about it, but it's not something like I go up and tell people, I guess. Like if they ask, I'll tell them, like
Yeah.
if they're like, why are you blinking so much or something, I'll tell them it's Tourette's and then have to explain it because, everyone knows it as the cussing disease.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, how often do you have to do that? I mean, do people point out your tics and ask what's going on, or is it just an awkwardness where you have to kind of like break that by saying, okay, here's the deal?
Well, I know in high school, a lot of people made fun of it more than tried to understand it, but there are
Yeah.
definitely some people who have like pointed it out. Or one time someone thought I was having a seizure because I just kept taking over and over again. So things like
Yeah.
that, I'll definitely explain what's going on.
So what kind of tics do you have?
The main ones, I like kind of like crack my elbow and like push out my arm is probably the most main one. I do a little
Yeah.
skip when I walk, nose twitching, eye blinking. My only vocal tick is like this little grunt, and that only really happens when I'm like extremely nervous or really tired, like about to fall asleep. And then like clenching my stomach, which is definitely my least favorite one.
Yeah, I have that too. Is that, do you hold your breath along with that?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that gets really annoying.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so is it the kind of thing where you're having a conversation and you kind of pause because you're in the middle of a tick? I mean, that's what gets me.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. I'm glad someone else understands that.
When did these manifest for you? I assume your tics have changed over time, but when did you first start exhibiting tics? How old were you?
I know it was second grade, so around 7 or 8 years old, and head bobbing was the main one. I still do that, but to a lesser extent. And then I kind of like kicked my leg up and like hit my back with it, sort of thing, which that was really
Yeah.
annoying too, especially because my school uniform required us to wear skirts, so that was not a good one. But yeah, second grade, and I guess I had just moved to Arizona in second grade, so my parents and I kind of attributed it to it's the move. Like that's why I'm so nervous. That's why I'm taking a lot.
How did this first get noticed? Like the early days of you ticking, were your parents already educated about what Tourette syndrome was and had an idea, or was it something that you guys had to explore together, or how did that go?
So none of us really had ever heard of Tourette's before. Um, my my dad actually used to pay me, like we would go hiking a lot, and he would pay me not to do my tics because they all thought it was something I
Really?
could control.
Yeah.
Which I would just hide in the back and like not let him see me do it. But they just thought it was something I
Right.
could
Wow.
control for the longest time.
Did you make any money off that?
Like $5, but
Wow.
and then yeah, it wasn't around until around seventh grade that they finally said, okay, maybe this is something she can't control. And my mom started looking into it, and she's like, I think you have this thing.
Right.
And we went to the doctor and got me diagnosed.
Gotcha. So what was the diagnosis? Was it a relief, or was it seen as like a new challenge ahead? Or, what'd you guys end up doing? Did the doctor give you advice about medication, or what happened?
I went on some medication, but it didn't seem to help. I'm on different medication now for my OCD, actually, and that seems to be helping my tics more than the medication fixed it. But it was kind of a relief to know, like, hey, I'm not going crazy. I can't control these. Like, it was kind of just a reminder that, hey, there are other people that struggle with this too. You're not the only one in the world.
Well, yeah. Did you connect with other people who have Tourette syndrome, or find a community online, or did you know people in person, anything like that?
Honestly, until about a year ago, I never met anyone else who had Tourette syndrome. And then my childhood best friend's younger brother was diagnosed. So that was
really
kind of cool to, just see someone else like who seemed normal, like, I mean, obviously we're normal, but like, I just didn't see it coming from that. I'm like, okay, maybe not everyone sees me as just the girl with Tourette's.
So were his tics similar to yours, or did you guys, compare notes about social experiences and things like that?
We didn't talk too much about it, but I know he definitely had a couple of the same ones. And I guess I just never really talked to people about it who actually have it. Like, I talk to my friends about it all the time who don't have it and are very supportive of it.
But have there also been situations, I guess, in the past year that have been made easier by your experiences? Just having the perspective that you have, and you get better at it with age. It took me a long time to get to the place where I was comfortable talking with anybody about it. But, with any misunderstandings or anything like that, you were talking earlier about people who point out your tics or maybe misunderstand them for something else. Does that happen frequently? You have to kind of explain yourself, and do people actually walk away with an appreciation? Do they seem to get it, or?
Most people definitely seem to get it. I know everyone brings up the Tourette guy on YouTube when I say it.
Of course.
And they're like, oh, it's an excuse to cuss. Like, you can just get away with it. I'm like, no, that's not what this is at all. But most people do understand it by the end of the conversation. Some people, like, I know, I'm engaged as well, and my fiance the other day, even, he's like, if one more person stares at you while you're ticking in public, I'm going to kill them. And I'm like, I just don't notice it as much because I'm so used to people looking at me and don't really care.
Yeah.
But if they ask, I'm more than welcome to explain it to them and have a conversation about them.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point too. With people who do notice, they just kind of move on with their day. It's not, anything that they necessarily carry forward with them, or feel like they have to turn it on you to where it impacts you in some way, or pick on you or anything like that. That's one thing that took me forever to accept, is that if people do notice me ticking, it's sort of, so what? They do their own thing too, and then they move on. And they go to the bank, they go to the grocery store, they go home. They don't think about me later that night. And
it honestly, like, annoys people around me, like my friends and fiance and family, more than it does me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's cool you have that kind of support. At what point did you begin talking with them about it? I mean, had you always been open with your friends, or did you kind of have to work up to that?
Well, I know my two best friends at the time when I was diagnosed, I pulled it up on the internet and I'm like, I have this thing. And we all researched it together instead of me doing it alone, which was a really cool thing.
That's cool.
So those friends have been really understanding from the start. Most friends will eventually, like, as we're becoming friends, say something about it, or I'll do it and they'll kind of give me a weird look and I'll explain it. It always happens at some point in the process, or I'll, like, bring it up in conversation with someone else, and a friend will overhear that and be like, oh, that's why she does that.
Has this gotten you interested in any sort of, advocacy? Or so with me, just kind of getting to this point of self-acceptance, it's gotten me way more encouraged in terms of advocacy, education, wanting to help people understand what it is without, and kind of taking Tourette syndrome out of the light that a lot of people see it as some sort of thing where you have to feel sorry for people who have it, or it's just, you can be a completely fine, functioning, quote unquote, normal adult otherwise. And have your career and be successful. And it's not often seen in that light. It's usually, these are people who are prisoners in their own body. And so this education piece has really kind of, I've gone to it. It's kind of won me over by way of the community.
For sure. Not anything on like a major scale, I guess, but I've definitely written like some research papers in school about it and presented about it. I know I did a lot of that. We had to do like a disease project our freshman year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose Tourette Syndrome, and we basically got up in front of the class and did it was like a year-long project. So that was a lot of fun because it helped me too to learn more about it, because that was not too long after I got diagnosed.
Yeah.
And then actually this Saturday I'm doing a photography project, trying to show mental illnesses through portrait photography. So it's definitely and Tourette Syndrome is one of those.
Oh,
so
that's amazing.
I'm trying to help people understand and see it from our point of view instead of, like the cussing disease or like you said, being trapped inside their own body.
That's amazing. So, I mean, are you just trying to, I guess, capture sort of the humanity that a lot of us have in common with these photographs, or what's the goal with that?
Yeah, for sure. To kind of show what it's really like more than what people see it as, and to show that we are normal human beings. There's not something wrong with us or something too different about us just because we have this slight difference.
Oh, that's so cool. So is this something that's going to be public that people can check out, or is it going to be online? Or
yeah, that's the goal. I'm going to try to get it published in possibly a magazine or an art exhibit. It'll definitely be online for sure.
Oh, that's so cool. And I want to follow up with you on that too. But back to what you were saying about doing the school research project and kind of discovering things for yourself about Tourette syndrome that you didn't know prior. What did you discover? And how did that help you in just knowing that?
Well, things like when I was reading through a list of tics, because I'm like, okay, maybe my tics are weird. Like even people with my own diagnosis will judge me for having weird tics. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one that struggles with this. Or, it was a nice reminder that I'm not alone. And things like medications and stuff, I researched a lot. And things that go along with it, like ADHD or OCD, because I know I struggle with OCD a lot, and it was nice to kind of connect the two and see what those have in common,
right.
And be able to go at them with a similar point of view.
That's cool. I mean, so it sounds like that's kind of gotten you interested more broadly in sort of other things that people deal with in their minds. I mean, the photography project sounds amazing to me. I mean, that's such a cool idea. I mean, it's obviously, it has value with you, but how did that come about?
I was actually just sitting there. My sister struggles with borderline personality disorder. So we have some different mental illnesses in the family. And so I was like, how can I show people that we aren't crazy, that we are normal human beings? And that kind of dawned on me when I was just sitting in my bed one day, because photography is something I'm actually good at and enjoy. And so I got another photographer who was interested, and we're really excited to do that. We got a bunch of models who all struggle with things in the mind, and we're all gonna work on that together. That's
so cool. That is so cool.
Thank you.
What haven't I asked about? There's got to be a million different variables that I want to make sure I capture everything we can, while we're here.
I know. I think it was the last episode of your first season, actually. Correct me if I'm wrong, but even the very beginning line before you started the interview process about being able to understand each other and stuff, having similar tics.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the whole, this podcast has been great because it's something I listen to as a reminder I'm not alone, because my tics have been really bad lately. Maybe it's moving back into college for the year or whatnot, or planning a wedding, but there's a lot of different variables that have made my tics a lot worse lately. And I guess I've just been really struggling with I'm going to be stuck with this forever. No one understands, even though they try to. But knowing that people out there actually understand is just so great.
Well, and people who listen learn a lot from, how other people have learned to kind of live with their Tourette syndrome or their tics or other comorbidities. There are a lot of variables that are inflaming your tics. But in general, I mean, have you found things that seem to kind of set you off? I think you talked about things happening when you're trying to sleep, but have you noticed patterns within yourself otherwise that it's like, okay, this is the kind of day where I know I'm going to be ticking like crazy?
When I'm getting ready for events, like when I have to do my hair and makeup, and I do modeling as well. So like when I'm getting ready for something, so not while I'm actually like for the photo shoot or whatever, but like when I'm getting ready for things, that's a big stressor for me that makes my tics go really bad. But then like I get really frustrated with that, and that makes it worse, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Another one is watching TV, just like sitting watching TV for some reason, like relaxing, I guess, is kind of a weird one, because I feel like it should be the opposite. But
well, I don't know. I mean, maybe you just feel kind of comfortable to let loose in those situations. Because I do the same thing. You know, when I'm relaxed or when I'm even interested in something I'm looking at, according to my fiance, that's when I start to perk up with my tics. Do you have any rituals or sort of any go-to thought processes or anything like that kind of help to alleviate this stuff for you?
I know this might sound weird, but even hugging someone I love, like my fiance started hugging me, like every time I'm doing a series of tics, he'll hug me and it'll like automatically make it stop, which we just recently learned, which is
that's awesome,
fantastic, because it's like an automatic relief. I have 7 younger siblings, so a lot of people to hug and stuff too. When I'm around people I'm comfortable with, you know, versus strangers, like I know when I'm in a place I'm not familiar with, I'm ticking a lot more too. So if I'm just at home, like, and I feel a tick coming on, like even like holding my baby sister or something will make it a lot better.
You mentioned sort of being in a place you're unfamiliar with. I mean, is there a anxiety that you go through that also kind of sets you off?
I definitely struggle with anxiety, and so that'll spark my tics for sure. And then ticking itself makes me more anxious, because I'm like, oh, this is not going to stop. Or like the stomach one, I'm like, if I hold my breath too long, I'm like, this is painful. So that definitely makes my anxiety worse, and they kind of trigger each other.
So with college and all these other variables, I mean, are you kind of at a peak right now with...
I feel like they're really bad right now, but I feel like they've been worse in the past, but now that they're different tics, like the stomach tick has come and gone, but now that it's back, I feel like that makes it worse. Like I would rather do my arm tick or my like skipping tick like twice as much, and you know, like because I would rather do that more than like do the stomach tick once and then like I hear that. But they've definitely like, it's come and gone a lot in my life. There was one point where I thought like it was magically gone, because like for like a month sophomore-ish year in high school, like I was just like pretty much tick free, and it was weird. But then of course they started back up again, and I don't know what exactly life event sparked that, but I would say I'm at a peak right now for my tics.
Well, you know, again, I mean, you sound like you have an amazing support system in your friends and your fiance, and I mean, I'm guessing he was instantly accepting of you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
How did it come up with him?
He actually thinks some of them are cute, like my nose twitch. He thinks is adorable. So
yeah. I mean, that's the best of, and that's what I hear so frequently is when people, you know, have a significant other or somebody they've been with for a substantial amount of time. I mean, it's sort of, the tics are kind of like this. I think Melissa C. Water used this word in her episode, that it's kind of a companion. It's just a characteristic that you notice about the person. Then you end up falling in love with that characteristic, and you kind of don't want it to go away. How did it first come up?
We were friends for a little bit before we started dating. So I guess by the time we started dating, he already knew about it. I don't really remember like the time I told him, but I just remember him being so accepting and wanting to learn more about it, and wanting to like read the research paper I wrote in 9th grade, sort of thing, just to learn more about it.
That's awesome. So when are you two getting married?
Next October.
Next October, 2019.
Yes.
What else? What else do we got? Any other sort of standout times in your life that do have kind of a direct correlation or connection to Tourette Syndrome, or just how it's kind of shaped you as a person?
It's definitely, going back to the whole education thing, like it's definitely made me want to show people more, like not even just about Tourette's, like about anything that people struggle with, any sort of diagnosis. Just show people what they really are, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand. I know in 10th grade there was one teacher who I ticked, and he like kind of like looked at me and like copied it, like confused as to what I was doing.
Yeah.
And like I felt really embarrassed, and so I told my mom, and she emailed the teacher all upset. But then that was even more embarrassing. But things like that, where it's like they don't mean to make fun of you, but they kind of just don't know what it is.
Right.
So to try to grow more awareness of, hey, if you see someone do this, it might be this. I think it's awesome that you're doing this to grow awareness and teach people what it is. I think it's really cool. Yeah.
Different is the title of the book by Janet McLaughlin. It came out in September of this year, and it's getting really good reviews. Here's the synopsis. 12-year-old Izzy wants to be like everyone else, but she has a secret. She isn't weird or angry, like some of the kids at school think. Izzy has Tourette Syndrome. Hiding outbursts and tics from her classmates is hard enough. But when a new girl arrives, Izzy's fear of losing her best friend makes Izzy's symptoms worse. And when she sees her crush act suspiciously, runaway thoughts take root inside of her. As the pressure builds and her world threatens to spin out of control, Izzy must face her fear and reveal her secret, whatever the costs. Authentic and perceptive, Different shines a light on the delicate line of a child's hopes and fears, and inspires us all to believe that perhaps we are not so different after all. So that's the synopsis. The book is from Absolute Love Publishing, and again, this is not a paid spot, it's not a promo. I was simply interested to learn about the book and the woman who wrote it. Here's me talking with the author, Janet McLaughlin.
I live in Sarasota, Florida, and I am an author. The other books that I had written, I have two others out, are more fun kind of reading for young readers that love to read, or older, reluctant readers, paranormal, fun stuff. But the book Different, which is just published in September, I truly put my heart and soul in this book, and I'm very excited about it, and I'm hoping that it will do a lot of good in the world. That's my intent.
Yeah. So, I guess it would be obvious to say that most authors have personal connections with the protagonists of their books and some of the minor characters even too. In your case, I'll go ahead and let you explain it. What is Different, and kind of who does it revolve around?
Different is a novel. The protagonist is a 12-year-old who has Tourette Syndrome, coupled with OCD, rage, and, whatever happens with pre-adolescent or, pre-teenage girls or kids in general. So, life is a challenge for her. The whole idea about writing the book came about let me start at the beginning. I have two granddaughters. I have two granddaughters that have Tourette Syndrome. They were diagnosed, the first one, the oldest one, who is now 21, was diagnosed when she was 5 years old. Mm-hmm. My daughter and I, who were very close, as are my granddaughters and I, we kind of suspected it when she was around 3. We saw some indications of it. And the reason our minds went there was that her mother-in-law told her that her husband at the time, she believed that he had Tourette's, but he was never diagnosed. The doctor gave her a pamphlet, and that was it. So when my granddaughter started to exhibit much more definitive signs of vocal and physical tics, we took her to a couple of doctors until she was definitively diagnosed. And honestly, even though we kind of knew what to expect, it was such a blow, such a shock. I am not an easy crier, but I remember crying because it's just so emotionally draining and challenging, and I don't have Tourette's. I'm on the periphery. It's not even my daughter. It's my granddaughter. Right. And yet it affects the whole family. It affects down deep into the family unit. And so I helped my daughter as much as I could, as my husband and I did, because when Jess when she was three or four, Jackie, my daughter, got a divorce. And so all this kind of happened at the same time. And when we know for sure that my granddaughter had Tourette's, then it was just all this emotional turmoil, and we had to deal with it. And so she was divorced, living with her two daughters, and my husband and I were the support system for her. 2 years later, she met a guy and got married, and he's been a wonderful support for her. So at least there was this family unit for them.
And you had mentioned turmoil, the sort of emotional dynamics. Was that kind of built on fears of what you thought the future might be like for your granddaughters, or what was that kind of? What were you thinking?
Not so much that as just the immediate problems that the disorder brought about. The oldest one really has a much more severe case than the younger one. The younger one's more of anxiety. The older one had really obvious physical tics, vocal tics, OCD, rage. Life was really just tough, particularly for her and for her immediate family, and then us peripherally. We were there. So when, the rage happened, or when something happened and the family needed a break, we would be able to come over, take her back to our house, and give both a break so that her family could have some breathing space. My daughter's family, my daughter and, husband and other child, and my granddaughter could have some breathing space. So we were involved in that way too. So it was more so in the beginning, just living in general. As she got older, some of those thoughts came in. What's her future going to be like? Now at 21, she's working. She I think has finally found a job that she loves and she'll stick with. She has had issues with that. She got a boyfriend, and life seems to be moving in the right direction for her. But all this time, all those years, watching and being a part of all this, the novelist in me never went away.
Right.
And I wanted to write a book about it, but I needed distance. I couldn't write it when I was in the middle of it all, and the emotions were just so strong.
That makes sense.
But when she went away to college, actually it was sooner than that. When she was in high school, I started the book, and it took much longer to write than it normally does for me because it was so personal. But I finally got it done and edited until it got to where it is today. These rewrites, you can rewrite 20,000 times and still not be happy. But the professional editing helps as well. Found a wonderful publishing company who loved the book and is 100% behind it. Absolute Love Publishing. And now the book is out there. And my goal is for it to help children understand what it's like to have Tourette's. If they see kids, in their classroom or whatever, for teachers, for parents to have something to give to teachers and say, here, read this, because this is a kind of a gut level of what it's all about. Now you'll understand what my daughter or my son is going through, because the pamphlets, they explain it, but they don't give you that gut level, what it's all about. For parents to read it and understand maybe a little more, I know that the mothers on the whole are very involved. Sometimes you get dads that just don't get it. I've heard that several times. So maybe it helps there. Sometimes there are grandparents that don't get it, or aunts or uncles or family or friends, whatever. So I'm hoping that it'll be a tool on all levels The one group that I think may not want to read it are the children with Tourette's. And
okay.
I get that. I know my granddaughter will never read it. And I think I've just seen too often imitation. You know, you read about it and then all of a sudden it's in your brain if you have Tourette's, and then you start doing that. And that might be,
happens with me too.
Yeah. So that might be something that children with Tourette's may not want to read it, at least not at 11, 12-year-old, maybe older might.
Mm-hmm.
And I could be wrong there. You tell me.
Well, I think it could go both ways. So, I attended Tourette conferences when I was a kid, and would be in an environment where I was around a lot of other people who were ticking, and I would indeed adopt certain tics that I guess just kind of rung with me. But at the same time, I definitely liked still kind of feeling like I was kind of part of this community and kind of seeing myself kind of portrayed in real time in other people and finding those connections. So I could see it being beneficial as well. But I definitely, I guess to your point too, it also has to be kind of the decision of the person with Tourette's. Can they handle kind of diving into this narrative that may, whether or not it mirrors their own life experience, if they're exploring other people's tics, is that something that's going to kind of exacerbate issues with them as well? But there's a part of me that thinks that the good outweighs the bad on that too. Especially,
well, I hope you're right. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, especially too if they know that the audience is sort of the broader populace of people that they would be interacting with, hoping that they understand them better and have a sort of a better prerequisite knowledge of. Here's what I read this book and I understand Tourette's from more of a human aspect a little bit better than the sort of business card version that I had before. And and I definitely like that you're taking that approach too. There's sort of like the clinical stuff that we heard of. Anybody can say like, oh, it's a neurological disorder, right? That's not really a deep understanding of what Tourette syndrome is. And we all know that it's not just tics. It's not just blurting things out or making grunting sounds or, having physical movements or anything like that, all kinds of stuff that comes with it. And you mentioned that the rage and other things that are difficult to control or impossible to control in some cases. So what did you have to put into that to kind of help convey what Tourette's is from a kind of this human level?
Well, my protagonist, Izzy, is a 12-year-old, eighth grader, with a great, best friend who is her rock. And she's a normal teen. I mean, you know how almost teen. She's a cute guy that she kind of crushes on and things of that sort. There's a mystery in it revolving around the boy, and she obsesses about him and the mystery. So that's how I show the obsessiveness. She's not. Well, there is some compulsion too. The flicking on and off the lights, that kind of thing. All of it is weaved, or I should say, woven into a story of a relationship with her best friend. Fear when a new girl comes into the twosome and makes it a threesome. Fear of losing it, that friendship. Trying out for the softball team and realizing physically what a challenge it is for her because she's on these meds that make her gain weight, slow her down, make her tired. What is she going to do about this? Will she overcome all this? Will she be able to hit that ball out of the infield? I love sports, and I always have sports in my books. And it's a book of triumph because she does overcome the odds. She works at it. She gets into trouble because she stops taking her meds on her own so that she can lose the weight and get the energy. And she realizes how wrong that is. When I say wrong, I am not pro or con meds. I am very neutral about that. But I also know you don't take yourself off medication. You get weaned off it. So it creates real problems for her and rage and things of that sort. So I try to touch all those bases, but I try to do it in such a way as it's what happens naturally. The parents, the agony, not agony, but the angst that the mother feels, trying to help the child and knowing she can only do so much. Same thing for the dad. It's all the stuff that I saw over that 15-year period my family go through. It's not my granddaughter's story, but it's my granddaughter's story, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? The tics that are in the book are the tics that I observed with her. She did not quit her meds on her own, but she said to her mother, at age 15, I don't want to take these anymore. And her mother said, it's your body. You know how you feel. So they weaned her off them. And she's doing okay without them. But I also bring in alternative methods that you can use. Not that I, delineate them, but that there are alternatives out there. There's a lot of different ways to deal with it. So I try to touch bases, but it's not a medical book. It's a story of a young girl living her life, dealing with the challenges that life brings to her, overcoming those challenges, and realizing that everybody has challenges. Everybody is different. It just so happens that people with Tourette's wear a lot of their differences on their sleeve, so to speak, whereas there are other children out there who live in a household of abuse, or although I don't bring this in, she realizes that, there are people out there with challenges, divorce, whatever. So maybe in the long run, she isn't so different after all. And that's really, I gave away the ending, but but it's an uplifting book. I mean, it might bring you to tears in some places, but it'll make you smile in some places. And I think, the ending is a feel-good ending. And it's not too long.
Yeah, I really love it as you described it. And I like how sensitive you are to the sort of interpretive part of it and what you can do about Tourette syndrome if you have it, or how you might regard somebody else who has Tourette syndrome and what you think they're able to do about it. When you said, that this is not a medical book, there are things that are maybe laid out in here that are based on what people have actually tried or alternatives to the hard medication. But that's the distinction for this podcast too, is this is not a medical podcast. It's just purely a storytelling, experiential kind of thing where we just talk about our experiences, kind of put them out there and see how they relate to what other people listening might have in their lives. And hopefully we can find these intersections that kind of make us feel a little bit less isolated. When you said too that, it's not your granddaughter's story, but it is her story, kind of using the word story in two different ways. I definitely dig that. What you said about medication and it kind of slowing her down or slowing down the character and the weight gain and all that. I went through that too. And, it's not to be ageist, so I'll just speak from my own experiences, but being young is tricky. And I could tell that, was the case definitely for myself, but also for my non-Tourettic friends who I grew up with. I mean, in kind of understanding that from the perspective that you had to put into the character, did you kind of bounce things off your granddaughter or run things by her, or kind of what was the character development part like?
It was all observation, Ben. My granddaughter is very, very private, and I was very circumspect in talking to her about it. I just basically sort of got her permission to write the book and then left it alone, because she is the kind of a child that, for example, I remember being in a restaurant with her when she was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and she wanted a certain food that wasn't available. I think it was a drink. Like she wanted a Coke and they didn't have Coke. They only had whatever. And she got very upset and a mini fit. And then she just curled up into herself and looked at me and said, everybody's looking at me, which they weren't. but she felt that way.
Yeah.
And so I took her into the bathroom so she could calm down, and then we came back out again. Well, she just feels that everybody is looking and judging, and that's her. The other child, her sister, on the other hand, I have Tourette's, live with it, you know? She's very open and, you know, and makes life a lot easier for her. She's got a lot of anxieties. Her tics are much milder than her sister's, but she's much more open with it. And I think much healthier attitude. But personalities are personalities. So with Izzy, she is more like Jess, my older granddaughter. She doesn't, you know, want to tell people. She doesn't want to expose. She just wants to be normal. She wants to be seen as normal. She doesn't, you know, and she had, and I'm sure it's many, many children with Tourette. She is fortunate, Izzy, my protagonist, to have a friend who understands and, you know, and supports her. So, you know, that, I think that was important. You have to have somebody in your life and in your book. And you also need somebody to create a problem with, because you can't have everything good. You can't have everything. You got to have conflict in novels.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, like I said, you know, the story is fictional, but most of what Izzy goes through is what Jessie went through my observations. And I have gotten really, really nice reviews from the Tourette Association of America.
Nice.
You know, they gave me a very nice review. Brad Cohen, awesome. You know Brad Cohen?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
God, what an awesome man he is. Just love him. He gave me a really nice review. And then he called me and he said, "Oh, I just reviewed your book." And we went back, not called me. I'm thinking he Facebooked me and messaged me. And we went back and forth for a half hour. Just a really, really cool. nice man. And I got a good review from Kirkus Review. So, you know, I'm really happy that people are reading it and saying that, you know, it's compassionate and there's another empathetic and stuff like that. But what it is really the story of a young girl going through her issues and finding her way through it.
Thanks so much for listening. Thanks to AJ. Thanks to Janet. I'll have links in the show notes to AJ's photography and to Janet's book. Next week is going to be a big one, closing out season 2 of the podcast. It's hard to believe that we're that far already, you know, closing out 2 seasons, especially considering the growth. I mean, just looking back at this season alone, the growth that this podcast experienced just in season 2 alone is amazing. It's off the charts. The next week is going to be unlike any conversation I've had on this show, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Head over to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook in the meantime, and if you've requested permission to join, remember it's a closed discussion group, and if you've requested permission to join, make sure you answer the questions you're presented with. We can't approve you until you answer the questions. You're there for good reason, just kind of a light checkpoint, just to make sure you're legitimate, not a bot. Thanks, as always, to Sophia for taking care of everything there. All right, more to come. See you next week. This is Ben.